It's another Manly Monday, and this Manly Monday we are talking about bullying, or as I call it, social abuse. I don't think the word bullying with the type of stuff that I'm talking about is accurate or appropriate. And I'll get into why. And yes, this is Manly Monday, so this is from this is about men. So anybody that want to leave a shitty comment about women, this happens to women too. Watch two women talking, okay? Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session, excuse me, for someone who can use it but can't afford it, coffee.com/Leanna K. As you can see, I'm still struggling with this stupid cough. And this video was inspired by discussions I've had with some clients, and man, the psychological effects of bullying go well into adulthood. And it's interesting that until about 10 years ago, there wasn't really good data as to why. One of the interesting side effects of all the video games and violence studies that happened about that time ago, because of Joe Biden, of all people, when he was VP, put all this money into research to study video games and violence. And of course, it turned out video games don't cause violence. But what that did is put a lot of attention on youth psychology and those developmental years between, the ages of like 12 and 25 to 28, when you start becoming an individual person, separating from your parents, but aren't quite a fully fledged adult. The brain is in a particular state. And that does not mean that people of this age can't make decisions. Quite the opposite. The problem is when you take away someone's power to make decisions, that stays with them their entire life. That feeling they're not safe, that feeling there's something inherently wrong or disgusting in them. All that stuff forms there. And there's been a bunch of stuff that conversations that I've been having, because now I've been doing the Leanna Care stuff for around a year now. And so we're just getting to the point with some people that we're getting into, the really intense, deep, 4 or 5 layers down. 'Cause people are, getting further along and they feel like they can finally start tackling this stuff. But it's tough because they found that, no surprise, people who are like straight up abusive, that, typical textbook or cliche bully, who's violent or, the leader of the pack kind of thing. The only correlation, the only sort of risk for those people is antisocial personality disorder. Shocker, they're sociopaths and psychopaths, or there's a greater correlation there. And people who were just victims have depression, depression, avoidant, agoraphobia. No surprise there, right? The really interesting stuff, and I'll link to a Forbes article that outlines the stuff. It's about 10 years old, but like I said, that's when this stuff started. The interesting data was the people who were bullies, but were also bullied. They were the worst of any of the groups. And this makes sense based on my experiences, because some of the things that make a person feel so lacking in worth, or that feeling that if somebody knew me, they'd reject me, is that stuff they did, to survive, or because they just couldn't take it anymore. And sometimes it came out at the wrong person. And, that's part of the reason I talk about my less than Cthulhu's hiding. Sorry, Cthulhu, no soul being swallowed today. but that's part of the reason I talk about my own experiences, even the less flattering ones, is because, look, I get it. You know, when you're pushed, sometimes it comes out the wrong way. And the process of forgiveness can be really, really difficult because, there's a part of you that hates the people who tormented you, but you did it too. So what does that make you? And that's when it's really hard. And because there is so much focus on, men as predators or violent men or male aggression, I think that this is more intense for men than typical women because, women I think a lot of the issues with women with this stuff is certain toxic adaptive behaviors aren't seen for what they are. So there's this feeling of victimhood where somebody's doing a lot of damage because they can't acknowledge that, they dished it out because, oh, that makes you bad. And because so much stuff is seen as just innate in girls. Whereas with boys, it's, oh, you can develop it. You can man up. You can get tough, right? Again, it all balances out in the shit wash, right? But it's different. And that it's a principle called moral injury, where you did things, either to get away from the bullies, to appease them temporarily, or, you ended up lashing out at the wrong person because you were just so beaten down. That really affects our perception of who we are. And that's a hard thing. The things that were done there are some people I work with who very much are still working out what was done to them. But below that was the sense that, they were weak or they were powerless, and that's some sort of moral failing. And that's the thing that really is tough, right? Because you can cite how it works, and I will in a second, but I want to validate the fact that you can intellectually understand all the good stuff, but that feeling that you just weren't enough, that's stubborn, man. And so let's get to what it's actually about, and the reason I call it social abuse instead of bullying. And when I mean social abuse, I mean the stuff that's not violent. It can culminate in violence, things like swarmings or restraining or, but I'm talking the social stuff, the stuff that really messes with people, the so-called reasons that somebody becomes a target. That stuff is insidious and it's screwed up because there's no good reason. There are certain things you don't do to people because they are people. No matter how much you disagree with them, no matter how much you think they're bad, there are certain places you just don't go. And, there's certain things you don't do to animals. There's certain things, you don't do to the environment. There's just certain things. And that's what gets lost in these social abuse cases. Permission structures get formed to pick on somebody. And if I list all the reasons, they're shitty reasons, right? The one that always gets me, always, is somebody has some sort of disability or some sort of scarring. And because I grew up in a kind of rough neighborhood, they actually had programs in our school. They were empathy programs that were done in the 80s where kids who, we had kids with cerebral palsy. There was one girl who had cancer, so she a leg had to be amputated, and, she was going through chemo. But on the first day of school, or brownies or whatever, you're not supposed to say brownies anymore because it's a racial slur. That fun intersection of a Celtic little imp thing and a racial slur for some Caribbean people. Yeah, sorry. So, I forget what they call it now, but pre-Girl Guides. There you go. Or, anything like that. Someone would come in and they'd do a little presentation explaining what was going on with this kid. And that it's okay. It's not contagious. It's just, and, we expect you to be decent to this person. And sometimes they were little assholes and ran with it. But I never saw a reason to not be nice to them. Now, part of it was because I stuck out too, right? Traffic light on my head. And maybe that was it. But as a kid, I never did normal. And this is the fun thing about trauma brain, okay? I am vaguely aware that I was subjected to this stuff. And I can kind of recall things that were said. I remember kind of bits and pieces of things that happened. But a lot of the memories are gone because of trauma brain. And I'm so disconnected from those events because there were bigger things going on in my life. And as much as that is a symptom of a mental injury, I'll take it because I don't have the walking wounded thing there that other people do. And, walking with people who are going through that, I got my struggles, but I'm glad I don't have to go through that. And, but yeah, but part of the reason I got into so much trouble is I was the one standing up for people who were picked on. And I have always been strangely scary. And so I got away with that to the most part. The scariest bullying I remember I went through was, and this is one of these things where permission structure, right? Here's an example. My biological father was racist. He was a lot of things. He was homophobic. He was a bunch of not great things. He was a Nazi sympathizer, low key, but he was. But he was racist. Definitely racist. And he was a supply teacher in the school board that I went to. And some kids made the connection to me, determined if my father was a racist, I must be too. So I had to hide at lunch and get out of school right at the end of the bell because they were going to kick my ass. And that I remember. I remember the feeling of fear associated with that. And that was grade 7. Was that fair? Well, on the one hand, you see their logic. On the other, no, because I didn't share his views. Let's say that. But what they said about him was totally true. He talk like redneck was just a term of endearment because he didn't see the problem with that kind of Southern racism. That was terrifying. And, this is where we get to, well, why didn't the school do something about that? Well, this is where it gets really complicated. By the time youth hit that age, and I don't say kids, because to me, a kid is under 12. Now, I was under 12 at that point because I skipped a grade. But by the time kids hit early adolescence, so grades 7, 8, they've already figured out that involving adults in youth problems tends to make it worse. And that's where the systemized issues with bullying, and where the adults and the system fails the targets and those kids who are caught doing both. The straight up bullies, the antisocial personality disorder types, they can go fuck themselves. I don't care about them for the purposes of this. And there are a lot of bosses out there that fit this profile, because narcissists and sociopaths, they are overrepresented in C-suite stuff, because we have a fucked up business model that rewards like damaging aggression, you know? And that's a social construct. It doesn't have to be that way, because that stuff's not beneficial for the species, right? It's not beneficial for humanity at large. But the average person is no better than chance at figuring out whether someone's telling the truth. So if you have 2 kids and you have a guidance counselor, a principal, or a teacher who has not had specific training in deception detection, 50-50 chance they're going to misidentify the problem. And kids already know that, because this kind of stuff, God, I remember stuff going on in the 3rd grade. Definitely the 3rd grade. Possibly as early as the 1st. I barely remember kindergarten, so it's, you know. And I skipped grade 2, so yes, there is no 2nd grade in my memory. It didn't happen. But I mean, I remember how nasty people were after my friend died in the Air India bombing. The shit they made up about her. Just maybe that's what stopped me from doing it, because I was just like, why would people do that? Permission structures. People find reasons to just dehumanize people because the system rewards that. Not just doesn't punish it, rewards it. Because, you know, if they lie a few times and get the other person in trouble, it feels powerful. That's a reward. They keep doing it. It makes completely logical sense, right? And so you only have to go through that a couple times before you recognize, even if your parents support you, the school system may not. And there's a bunch of really bad regulations regarding privacy that make it even harder, because those laws, those rules get misapplied all the time. You know, I mentioned Lizzie Finnegan on and her daughter on Friday. That's one of the things they're using the student medical privacy statute to dodge doing anything about the problem, and that is not the first time I've heard that. It's amazing how many people in power in educational systems have no respect for young people. And I started as a peer counselor when I was in grade 11. I worked with grade 9 students. Was that peers? Well, these kids were in the foster system. They had a lot of hard living. But that's where I started to see how too many adults discount the importance of what young people's experiences are. And this fucks people up for life. Because you're taught as a kid, you have to rely on adults when you're a child. And when they don't protect you, when they don't nurture you, that obviously causes damage. And then you get into that period where you start to pull away from your parents and other adults and try to figure out who you are. And, not only does that lack of protection and nurturing get worse, but everything you do to try to figure out who you are is turned into this actively evil, bad character flaw. And it's worse than ever now. I mean, adults are acting like a bunch of assholes with this think of the children shit. But, it was always that way. I mean, that's how I knew my dad was homophobic. Because, yeah. He was one of those people who just thought it wasn't real. It was just, nope. And, yeah. But, so young people don't let adults know. Because you know what? They tried. And it didn't work. And why would anybody do something that might too likely make it worse? Right? And that's where they start to lose hope. That's where they start to lose faith in the system. That's where they start to... And there's a difference between being introverted and preferring to be alone and not feeling safe in groups. There's a difference between introverted and avoidant. How do you tell the difference? Well, one, you like your alone time, but you're fine in groups of people or some groups of people. I mean, there are subgroups of people I'm awesome with. I look forward to seeing them. And then others, I'm like, either becomes they're normies or it's some sort of media event where everybody's, looking to network. And I don't network. I know that sounds insane, but I don't network. I go into these places with a sincere interest in people. I will talk to anybody and I will spend just as much time with somebody who is just very interesting as someone who is important. I very rarely like talking to important people. Just because they tend to bore me when they don't actively irritate me. And, I mean, I'm not good at that game, but, I consider the only winning move there is to not play. Thank games journalism for that. So, what do you do if what I've just described is you? It's about figuring out how to get enough of a sense of control over your environment, and you have to get to the point where you know that if you say stop, the people closest to you will stop. You say no, they will stop. That's what comes down to it. And it's amazing how many families, Lord, the problems start right at the beginning. The families want to help someone with depression. You'll notice I don't say with my peer counseling work and, artist management work and business, like job coaching, all that stuff. I never say I'm helping people. I say I'm working with people because it is not help. One, it is a service they're paying for. Two, it's not helping. I'm not like, hello, I'm going to help. You help somebody move a couch. You work with them on this stuff. Ultimately, every success is theirs and every hardship is theirs. And I'm not going to do that to somebody. But because the idea of helping is minimizing that person and what they want. Because a lot of people who are being helpful missteps right at the beginning. They'll do all this stuff and set up all these things and they're helping, but it's only help if the person actually wants to do that thing. If the person doesn't actually want to do the thing you're twisting their arm to do, it's not helping. It's probably making them feel bullied again. And that's an easy thing to check. But a lot of people don't. And so families can unintentionally exacerbate PTSD, avoidant conditions, anxiety, depression through that expectation. And so the most effective, easy thing you can do for somebody who is in a bad spot and you care about them is to be, do you want this? And I had this wonderful conversation last week with an intake psychologist for one of these charities. It was actually a charity that trains support dogs. So everything from, an emotional support dog to seeing eye and mobility assistance animals. And yes, I said dog, Zelda. Hello. But I was, it was a consult for a client at the client's request. And I said, we were talking about something and how there was sort of some skipping steps. And the psychologist went, yeah, if they're not there yet, they're not there yet. Then you don't do this, you do this. And I'm like, yes, that's how I knew, my client was in good hands here because they got that. And that's the thing well-meaning carers miss, is if the person you're caring for isn't ready, like really not ready. Like it's not, they want to do it, they're just afraid. They don't want to do it yet. If they're not there and you try to push them for their own good, that is making the problem worse. Because the whole thing, the whole ball game, pardon the metaphor, is, hi Zelda, is giving that person a sense that their life is somewhat within their control. And so giving them that extra time to just sit and be and feel like even 65% ready. I know that's my thing. If I feel 65% ready, I'm never going to feel totally ready to do anything. Oh God. But 65% ready is my threshold. At first, maybe people need more. No one's ever going to be 100% ready. But 65% ready is it for me. Unless somebody's there, or the 70 or the 75, whatever makes them feel a little bit confident that it might work. They have at least hope, a reasonable expectation of success, because healthy goals are based on things you can control. It's not therapy top 10 phrase. If they're not there, you're pushing them back down. And for people who are bullied and people who are working through, this is the beginning, right? This is it. Having a sense of control, because that's what the social abuse took from you more than anything, right? We all get into fights sometimes. I picked some stupid fights. They were brave fights. They were noble fights, but they were stupid fights. And I got my ass kicked. Does that linger with me the same way that thing about being branded a racist in the 7th grade does? No, they're totally different circumstances. Why? Because, okay, in the cases where I got my ass kicked, I probably would have done it again because right is right. I know it's stupid. I know, but that's me. I just would rather fight the good fight and fail than have to live with letting someone else bear the brunt of unfairness. That's just me. The universe is fucked. Let's start some trouble. You may have noticed, if you've been following me for any period of time, I will fight a fight I think I can't win if I think it's the right fight, and if it allows me to be consistent later on. That is one of my fundamental operating errors, because that's a Freudian slip. Fundamental operating principles, because that's how I maintain my feeling that I am in control of my destiny and I can do this. I will not say something just because it's short-term beneficial. I can't. Everybody else is going to have something different, but that's a start. Hopefully you found this video useful, and Zelda's very cute. Come say hi, Zelda. Yes. Zelda. There's Zelda. Okay, here we go. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/LeannaK, or buy a one-time Leanna Care session for someone who can use it but can't afford it. Excuse me. Coffee.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching. Shoot, I'm slow on it. Manly Mondays. There we are. Zelda's crawling all over me.